Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's DevOps Derek Weekly. Today I have Richard Hooper, aka Pixel Robots, on Twitter. Hey, Richard, how are you today?
Hey Derek, yeah, I'm good. Bit tired, even though it's only a Monday, but it's all good. The week's only just started, but we'll get through it.
Yeah. I know that one. I know that one. Obviously you're pretty big in the Microsoft Azure world. You're an MVP as well. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Richard.
Yeah, so obviously everyone knows Miss Pixel Robots. Been in IT since I was about 21-ish, something like that. Always had an interest in IT, like I built my first computer when I was 11 and stuff like that. But I wanted to be an animator, so I sort of went down that path, like claymation, like Wallace and Gromit kind of stuff. Figured out that that's a very hard job to get into and everything, so thought I just do what I like to do at home as my hobby and make it a job. And now I'm here. It's been a fun journey. Technology has totally changed since the DOS days and Windows 3.1 that I started with. But now we've got the Azure cloud, and it's just so much easier now. So much easier.
Yeah, it really does make things easier. It's funny because it was something I was chatting with Paul Broadwith last week. Paul is a man of a certain age. Obviously, Paul, if you're listening, I'm sorry. What that means is
I used to
he's
actually
really
work with Paul as well.
really
Yeah, back at HPE days.
nice. You know
Yeah,
everybody.
I wouldn't go that
Um,
far. Not as much as Gregor, but yeah.
yeah, we had Gregor on about 3, 4 weeks ago now. Really, that was a really good session. But it's funny because I was chatting with Paul, and obviously both of us come from operations, as do you.
Yeah.
And it is funny because obviously we were talking about this. It was like I was using some ARM templates and then using Chocolate to install a bunch of packages. It took like 20 minutes or 25 minutes to spin up a full VM, um, then using ARM and then run through a whole bunch of Chocolate installs. It was like you can do like SQL Server packages, you can do, Visual Studio, everything. It was like a dev VM. And it was funny. It was like we were talking about it and how that actually would have taken about 3 months before because
Yeah.
you had to put in, you get the request in for a new server, you would go and buy it from HP, Dell, IBM, etc. Then you would rack it, and then at that point you're going to get IPs, and then install an operating system, maybe install SQL on it. It used to take 3 months, and then now it's less than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
really is.
definitely make things
I,
easier
I,
because that's the thing.
yeah, I definitely do not miss racking servers, so I'm
No,
loving this new cloud age.
it's the
Yeah.
do you know honestly it was the fingertips that used to always get me,
Just.
and then screwing the bolts with your fingers so that either your fingertips were sore, and then on top of that, the end of your fingers were sore because you had the nut bolts, and you were like,
Yeah,
yeah,
trying to get the cage nuts in, and then you always get them in
yeah,
slightly the wrong place, and then you have to try and do it out, get the screwdriver in there, and then you end up slicing your finger open.
yeah,
Definitely
and
don't
then
miss them
you would
days.
drop it down as well, so it would fall down under the rack, and
Yeah,
then you'd be like, so yeah, it'd be like one of those things you'd land up taking in about 20, but actually only using about 4, and the other 16 landed up under the server somewhere.
yeah.
But yeah, it is funny. The operations has definitely changed. Obviously that move from operations to DevOps,
Mm.
um, and it's definitely, things are definitely getting much easier. So today you wanted to talk about operations
Yep.
and Azure Kubernetes Service.
Yeah, so obviously when Kubernetes came out, everyone said it's a tool for developers only, and all that. There's this big push from Kubernetes, Microsoft, other places saying Kubernetes is to make operations easier for developers. I've been using it for a couple of years now, and it's really not a developer tool, in my opinion. You've got so much stuff going on that you sort of a normal developer isn't going to know about networking and stuff like that. You'll get the 10x developers who do know all of this kind of stuff, but they're very rare. It's it's one of those things where you need to know capacity planning, networking, the underlying patching schedules and stuff like that for your AKS nodes and all of that stuff. So I've been trying this year to sort of explain to people that Kubernetes is for the IT ops. Don't be scared of it. yes, it is a bit hard to get used to, but if you can do batch scripts and stuff like that in PowerShell, you can do YAML files for Kubernetes and stuff like that. So just don't be scared, basically.
Yeah, it is interesting because it's funny though. I generally find that a lot of things are aimed at the developer market, and it's funny because I generally find almost everything in some form is generally an operations tool. But then they probably think the same thing if you're a developer.
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah.
so it is interesting because it's like it's funny because I don't like the term DevOps engineer. I don't think it's a job title personally.
Oh, I totally agree with you. It's a methodology, a way of doing something. It's not a job title, but the amount of jobs out there for a DevOps engineer is just crazy.
Yeah, and it is. It's like, but it's in operations. It started in operations. It's continued in operations, and it is something that it's quite interesting. I think it is something I see quite a lot, and it is. It's like, but this is your Kubernetes. But the thing is like that job title. I just don't like it. But yeah, YAML. That's another thing entirely.
Yeah,
That is something I'm not a huge fan of.
I can understand that. But the best thing with Kubernetes and that, most people have already created the YAMLs, so just copy and
Yeah.
tweak. You don't need to rewrite the whole YAML file or anything. So it makes life a lot easier for us IT ops people.
It's funny actually. What I just want to do just now, I'm just going to show you this little tool. Obviously, I work at Octopus Deploy. There's a tool that we have put together. Um, if you're interested, you can go to k8yaml.com and you can actually generate the YAML for you. So you
Oh,
can, for
wow.
instance, so it's just something to be aware of. So this actually would do a lot of what you're after.
That's
So you
really
can
cool.
play, but yeah, it's something. It's funny. It's this was done by someone called Matt Casperson. One of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. And yeah, he just came up with this one day, and I was like, Matt, like, how do you do this?
Mm.
So yeah, it is something just to be aware of. So you can get that at khyaml.com, and it will effectively write the YAML for you.
And that's open. Anyone can use it. It's free. You don't
Yeah,
need an alternate. Yeah, wow, that's
yeah, no.
really cool. So Octopus are making the Kubernetes a lot easier for the IT pros right there.
Well, hopefully, it is really cool. And also, one of the things just to be aware of, you can go in and play about with this. It's entirely free. I will stick it in the YouTube description afterwards, but it is really, it's because that's the thing is YAML can be a bit of, I'd say it takes a bit of time to,
You got to get the
um,
spacings right.
yes. And do you know the funny thing is though is Octopus runs its cloud. So we have Octopus Cloud. It's got 2,500 cloud instances, and that's all running on Azure Kubernetes Service.
Oh, cool. Is that like Windows containers or Linux containers, or
Linux.
is that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah, try not to use Windows containers if you can. They're a bit slow and new. Hopefully
Yes.
soon they might get better, but yeah, we've been running Windows containers since they went GA in our AKS cluster, but before that we were running them manually in our own VM scale set because it's
Why
didn't
not?
support it. Yeah, we had to use it. So, but I've learned a lot since then. And again, with Windows containers, most developers don't understand the Windows operating system, and you kind of need to know how the file systems and that kind of work. So again, another ops thing where you need to know. So everything
Yeah.
always points back to ops.
I think so as well. I think so
Yeah.
as well. Because it's funny because one of the misconceptions I get a lot with operations is DNS, for instance. Oh, DNS is easy, it's very easy, and it is for the most part, right? Like, see, like 90% of it. Yep, you're creating a serial,
Add
you're
in a
creating an A
record,
record,
yeah.
fine.
But when it goes
But
wrong,
yeah, it can go very wrong. Add in
mm,
DNSSEC, TXT records, etc. Suddenly it becomes an entirely different beast.
the amount of people who can't understand SPF records as well, and they're so simple, it's just blows people's minds. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. It is interesting. So Obviously, you're talking about Azure Kubernetes Service.
Mhm.
Under that, what is that running on? What do you need to use Azure Kubernetes Service?
So obviously, it's recommended to use Azure AD now. So it's very easy to integrate it with AKS. Before, you have to use like service principals and stuff like that. But nowadays, it's just a switch in the CLI or in your ARM template, a little bit of magic. So that's definitely recommended. You sort of also need to use like Azure Security Center, to sort of monitor your cluster. Again, another sort of ops thing, because developers don't care about security, I find. So this IT ops always have to care about security. And there's a cool feature in AKS, which I don't know if any of the other platforms have it, but there's Azure Advisor. So what Microsoft does is talk to all of their enterprise customers and sort of find out what they're doing, and then they sort of scan your cluster and then sort of recommend you put things in. So like recently I had pod disruption budgets, which are basically a way for Kubernetes to make sure you don't always shut down all your pods. So like if you say you have Rabbit MQ in your cluster, you only ever really want to get one down at a time. So if you're doing a drain and there's 2 rabbits on one node, with the PD pod disruption budget, it would only ever take one down until the next one's up. So that was awesome, because I run RabbitMQ in my Kubernetes cluster. So I put that on, got rid of the advisor. Would never have even known about it if it wasn't for Azure Advisor. So that's really cool.
Nice. Because that's the things. Obviously, it's funny. I did a webinar recently on Azure Kubernetes Service using Octopus Deploy, and it's so flexible. And the thing I like about it is, obviously, Kubernetes and microservices kind of go hand in hand. They don't need to go hand in hand, but that microservices approach and Kubernetes really does help with that approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
It's funny because obviously you do, I do kind of, it does worry me a little bit, because obviously we've traditionally went from those legacy, huge, kind of monolithic applications. And those are a nightmare to work with, right? Because obviously it's all self-contained. You want to update one part, you need to deploy the full thing again.
Yeah, and then sometimes you even have the application where you need to log in as a user to get it to run, because it's such a legacy application. And
yeah,
support nightmare.
And that's it. And it's like you've got all these, and microservices though. I think I showed this before. There was like microservices is a completely different. It's another hellish. Really, if you go pure monolith, right, it's disaster. It's something that'd be an absolute nightmare to work with. If you're going pure microservices, that's suddenly you had one application and now you have 300 of them.
Mm-hmm.
So like that, it does raise some questions about what that means, from an IT operations perspective.
Yeah, so obviously when you have that one big monolith, you got to install it several times, potentially on different servers or just one big server. Whereas with the microservices, yes, you get lots of little bits, but they're usually in like a container registry. So Azure Container Registry, you can get your pipelines to automatically scan it using tools like Trivy and stuff. So for the IT ops, it's just like having a zip file in a way, and then you customize your YAML, you put it in a pipeline, you push a button to hit, to approve the deployment. Like I think you can do that with Octopus Deploy, and you can do it with Azure DevOps, Jenkins, and all the others. And then you hit deploy, and then the hardest bit for an IT ops person really with microservices is understanding the links, like in that picture right there, how everything links together. So if you can use tools like Message Bus, Service Bus, Event Grid to have a central point that everything talks to, it will make your IT ops life a lot easier.
Yeah, because that's the things. Like this is from Monzo, the Monzo back, and this is how it's a pretty low resolution image, unfortunately. But each line is the other microservices talking to other microservices,
Mm-hmm.
and you become like this. And I'm just like, I look at it and I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like how do you deal with firewalls? how do you deal with patching? How do you deal with uptime? The good thing is you've got decentralized. Traditionally you would have that centralized operations team. Obviously now you get that decentralized responsibility with things like microservices, containers, AKS. People it isn't some help desk now. You do tend to find that there is a little bit more ownership, and obviously breaking down that silos and stuff like that. So that does really help.
Yeah, definitely. But I find the people who are working with microservices in the IT ops world, they care so much. Like, they used to remember 300 odd server names and IP addresses. So to them, remembering that microservice talks to that microservice and then talks to that, it isn't really that much different to remembering I've got server name, hydrogen, and it's on IP 192.168 or whatever. And then that talks to this box over here and that, and then, it's not that much difference. But if you can design your application so it all talks through like Event Hub or Service Bus or something like that, it will make your life a lot easier. Not every application can do that, but try to use messaging systems as something I recommend, just to make your life easier.
It's all about asynchronous communication, in our lives, in our daily lives, but also now when it comes to obviously compute as well, which is really interesting. So you've got your Kubernetes cluster, you've got your containers, you've got pods. How do all of those correlate?
So obviously you've got your AKS cluster, like you said, and then inside your AKS cluster you have like a system node pool, which are a collection of Linux VMs in a VM scale set, which you can actually see in the Azure portal. They are designed to run the sort of pods, daemon sets and stuff that are needed for AKS. So you got your your kube proxy and stuff like that sort of sitting on these system pools as such. And then you have your user node pools where you can actually run your application. But what gets a bit confusing is you can actually run your application on the system node pool, but it depends how big your thing is. Sometimes some people just like to have system node pool just for the Kubernetes stuff. Me personally, I'm happy to chuck a few things on there because, I'm paying for the compute, so I might as well make use of it. Yeah, it makes sense. And you can then have your Windows node pools as well. So these are all VM scale sets. So you get all the benefits of your VM scale sets as normal. Just don't ever try to scale the VM scale set because you can see it in the Azure portal. So don't manually scale it there. Always use the Kubernetes page in the Blading Azure portal. Otherwise, you can just go crazy wrong, and you don't want to undo that. Talking from experience, don't do that.
So, I mean, it does bring in an additional thing about capacity planning. Like, that's one of the things, like, how do you know how much can run on that cluster?
Yeah, so I think if I remember right, Microsoft recommend you run about 30 pods maximum per node, because you've got to worry about IP addressing and stuff like that. So by default, if I also remember right, Microsoft also recommend about 80% is what you can use per node pool, because obviously you got like your CPU and memory, because you've got all of the Windows stuff underlying all the Linux stuff and the pods that the daemon sets have to run on every node in your AKS cluster. So they don't technically reserve it, but they recommend you only use 80%. So when you're figuring out, I've got this many pods, they use this much CPU, this much memory, I'm going to need, I don't know, 4 DS3 V2s or whatever they are nowadays. So you just got to remember, you've only got about 80% to play with, 30 pods maximum per node. And that sort of includes your sidecars if you're going to do like service mesh like Istio and that. So yeah, you've got to obviously think about that. If you're setting your like auto scale as well, so you need to sort of remember the VM scale set has limits on how many nodes can be in a node pool. Can't actually remember what that limit is. I think it might be 1,000, but yeah, someone can correct us in the comments if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is it's interesting because one of the things I remember, I was doing some learning on this as part of the webinar I was doing in August. the first five IPs are reserved, so you
Hmm.
can't actually. So no, you have to factor that into your subnet planning as well.
Yeah, with subnet planning as well, it depends on your update policy for your pods. But if you have like, say you have 5 pods running and then you do an upgrade to that, a rolling upgrade, it spins up another pod. So that's another IP address it's taken. If you're using the Azure CNI network, which means every pod has an IP address on the subnet, which is publicly available to your system. So you can make sure you lock it down in your NSG and stuff like that. So yeah, it's crazy. You can actually, depending on the size of your application, you can actually use so many IP addresses, which is why on some of mine I way overestimate because I don't have them connected to my on-prem network or anything, so I don't mind about IP overlapping or anything like that. They're just a separate entity sitting up in Azure on their own, talking to Azure AD and then other Azure services. So the IP address, and I just give it a massive range, so I never have to worry about this pod's not coming up because I've run out of IPs, or this node pool won't come up because I've run out of IPs. It's a worry I try and take away early as possible.
That's a question actually, because obviously you can use Azure Active Directory and AKS, and that kind of
Mm-hmm.
generally simplifies your authentication. But you can also use RBAC as well.
Yeah, so as you can see on the screen, it's in preview at the moment. You have to sign up and then they give you access per subscription. But basically, everyone knows Azure rollback access controls, in the IAM policy in the Azure portal. What this is going to let us do is, instead of having to worry about cluster rules and cluster rule bindings using YAML file, you just add a user to the group in Azure, and then they've got the access they need for the Kubernetes cluster. Like, that's so much easier. I don't have to worry, set all these pipelines to push my permissions out. I can just do it all through Azure.
Yeah.
So much better. Like, anyone could do it then, basically.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. Azure Active Directory, I see, so even if you take the Azure, but Active Directory generally does simplify things. But yeah, definitely Azure Active Directory with Azure RBAC, which is role-based access control.
Yeah.
So you can do all this. You can actually specify your AAD profile. But yeah, if you check out this page, it will actually talk you through how to enable it. If you actually just at the top, it tells you how to enable the RBAC preview as well.
Yeah. So on that one at the moment, you just have to also sign up. So it just says it under the prerequisites, I believe. Sign up. You just give your subscription ID over. It's a Microsoft form. You put your email address, and then they should hopefully sign you up, and should be good. But don't run it in production yet, but test it, play with it, and plan out your sort of migration. Again, identity, another itops focused developers just want full access to everything. They always want to run as a local admin on their PC so they can do what they want. So, again, Kubernetes is for the IT pro.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting. But that's the thing, because it is this new way. But it's funny because you do have that kind of master. You have the cluster, then you have nodes, then you have pods. And the way I've tried to explain it to people, particularly in IT ops, is your node is a bit like your VMware host. Um, your pod is a bit like your virtual machine.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. So it's funny because when I first, I just thought everybody ran a single container in a pod, and then that was it. But you can run multiple containers within a single pod on Azure Kubernetes. So you can have that. So because obviously, what the main benefits of Kubernetes is that you don't have to have that operating system layer. You're not having to then reinstall Windows or Linux, 15 times. It is all that shared kernel. Yeah.
But one thing, talking about operating system, obviously, there are nodes, virtual machines running underneath their VM scale sets. So as IT operations, we do have to worry about updating them. Microsoft have made that a lot easier before. Before you had to use like a Kubernetes version upgrade to be able to upgrade the nodes underneath. But recently they've released another Azure CLI command to basically just let you upgrade the nodes underneath, so you can do it per node pool. They release updates about once a week as well, so you just keep doing that once a week in your maintenance window, and it just means you're always secure and up to date, and you don't have to update the whole Kubernetes version to just update your nodes, which is, I wish they had done that a lot earlier. Trust me. Had to use a tool called Kubernetes Update Reboot something or another, and it was like some pods running on the Kubernetes cluster. It would check a file on the in the nodes to say I've done my updates, I'm ready for a reboot. It would check that and then reboot them, and then send you a Teams message or a Slack message in that. So this new method, it's not quite automatic yet. Hopefully they'll figure out a way to schedule that, or we can, play around with logic apps or function apps to call the ARM APIs and do it on a schedule. So that's something I'm looking into to maybe blog about one day. But yeah, it's just so much better now.
Nice. And there's lots of documentation. If you go to docs, and then you can check it. So there's lots of stuff here about what is AKS, actually deploying an AKS cluster in 5 minutes using Azure Portal, the CLI, which is definitely my tool of choice when it comes to command line. Obviously, PowerShell has a bunch of benefits, but CLI, if you're not familiar with a CLI, definitely jump in and use that.
And you can use the CLI in PowerShell as well, so it's not just a bash thing for people scared of Linux.
It's and the thing I like about that as well is check out AZ interactive mode. Effectively, it pretty much writes it for you. You're really just kind of like filling in the gaps. So there's lots of stuff to find out. So obviously you can use ARM templates. Obviously you can use Azure PowerShell. There's lots of stuff here. I have actually deployed this voting app. It is funny. I'm definitely a dog person, so the cats never got much love.
Poor cats.
But yeah.
Don't let Isadora hear you say that about cats and dogs, We need to get Izzy a cat.
Well, that's it. It's I mean, get a cat. Definitely get. I mean, I grew up with cats. It's a bit off topic, but I've got 2 chocolate Labradors now that are brothers are coming up here. But there's great tutorials. You can actually, if you run through these, it'll take you through preparing applications, because you'll need a container registry. That's where you host your containers. Then obviously from there, you can then deploy it to your Kubernetes cluster. Then you can run the application, scale it. That's that's one of the benefits with AKS is you can scale it. That's one of the main benefits. It's kind of how Kubernetes came about, because obviously it started at Google. And they run things at scale that, like, to this day, I mean, I've done my research, but like, how does something like Google run? There's hundreds of thousands of servers globally. Like, how do you even plan that?
It's like, is it one guy? Does he know everything in there? Like, most IT companies, one guy knows everything. There can't be anything like that at Google, can there?
I mean, I'm sure there's. Do you know what's funny? Like, it's like these guys, they must sit, and it's like they're really, they're the ones with the answers. And like, we Google stuff. Like, the minute I'm on Google at least 15 times a day. It's like that. You'll do something, you'll leave 6 months behind it. And it is the most basic stuff. But definitely, these guys at Google have created Kubernetes. I think they'll probably keep them in a cupboard. It's a bit like the IT crowd.
Yes.
What was it? What was his name?
What is it? Richmond?
Richmond, that's it. Yeah. So basically, the person who created Kubernetes is probably Richmond's intelligent brother.
Yes.
But yeah, you can do this. There's lots of stuff about cluster. So the concepts where you can find out about clusters, workloads, access and identity. There's loads of great stuff in there to check out. So if you are,
this is one good thing that Microsoft has done. The documentation for Kubernetes is just so good. You can literally, anything you're thinking about to do, you can usually find it in here. They even have links to tell you how to deploy service meshes like Istio, Linkerd and HashiCorp Calico, I think it is, or something like that, or Console even.
Right,
Calico is a different thing altogether with Kubernetes. So many names. But yeah, they're even helping you do other things, even though they've just brought out their own service mesh, which is still very new and like not even version 0.1, I think.
Right.
They're showing you how to do other things as well, which is just awesome. Not many companies will show you that, which is good.
Yeah, that's the thing. And just one of the things that I've came across a few times, where security does seem to be a bit of an issue on containers. It's not quite as well documented. Do you have any general tips for people when securing your Kubernetes, AKS, and containers?
So obviously integrate it with Azure AD, because identity in one place is the answer to a lot of your issues. Make sure you use like Azure Firewall if you're sort of doing that kind of traffic and stuff on it. Think before you deploy it, do you need a public facing AKS cluster? Because with AKS you can have private clusters, so it can be totally off the internet in a way, so think about doing that. Obviously with the Kubernetes API you control it through a node on your subnet or something like that, or you can route through, I believe. So plan that first. There's some really good articles on this page for security as well, so follow some of their best practices. Look at using Azure policy to lock down what pods can talk to what and over what IPs and stuff like that. Or you can look at Gatekeeper, I think it is. It's an open source version, which the Azure one is going to be based off, I think, if I remember right, or it was, can't remember. It changes all the time with Azure. It's very hard to keep up to date with everything. But yeah, just treat them like you would a VM, really. Lock it down as you would. If it's a Linux one, make sure you use SSH with key pairs and stuff like that. If it's Windows, make sure that password is only known by certain people. Also try and lock it down so you don't even, if you ever need to access the VMs at that level, which I've run Kubernetes for 2 years and I've never needed to go into the VM level, just lock it down and use your network security groups and everything. Only open what needs to be open. And then for egress traffic, just make sure you give a public IP address for egress if you need that, so you can then lock it down to one IP address and not random IPs. Again, it makes it easier to control what you're doing. And use managed identity, which is quite new, but it means you can talk to other Azure services very securely compared to sharing username and passwords in your source code and everything.
Doesn't sound too dissimilar from your usual virtual machines. You've still got a network security group, you've still got a firewall, probably got, and that's the thing, because Kubernetes has its own networking stack internally, then it also has that externally as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, so if you use Kubelet, it has that kind of internal IP range, and then your external one. But if you use the Azure CNI, like the container network interface, your internal IP range is actually on your subnet. So every pod has an IP address on that subnet. So it's better in ways because you can do different things with it and you can actually put the policies on that one. I don't think the Azure policies work with the Kubenet, but Kubenet's a lot easier. Yeah, you have an extra hop and stuff like that. It shouldn't affect latency or anything. So when you're starting out, try Kubelet, and then if you need to redeploy your whole AKS cluster, and use Azure CNI. Because you've got to remember with AKS, with pods, they're not there forever. You should design your cluster using like ARM templates so you can just redeploy it, like the DevOps approach. Don't get attached to your cluster. Don't get attached to anything in microservices.
Yeah, what's it? It's all comes down to that. Treat your servers like cattle, not like pets.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've actually got this a T-shirt that says that on it just now on the back.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, you can so some common stuff. So say for instance, you're brand new to Kubernetes, you want to learn about Kubernetes as well as Azure Kubernetes Service. Definitely check out Microsoft Learn. There's a really great AKS workshop that you can go through, so you can actually go through. There's an introduction. You can deploy Kubernetes with AKS. Have you went through this workshop, Richard?
Yeah, I had a quick look through that because it's only been out not that long, but it's really good. I've shown some people at work because they're learning more about Kubernetes, so it's not always just me dealing with it. So I'm trying to get some of our developers excited about what Kubernetes is and that, because all they care about is, I've got a container package, you go chuck it over the fence, you sort it out. So I'm trying to get them all excited, and this is actually helping a lot, especially because it's just written so well, and you can actually you're building a whole AKS cluster and deploying an app just through this one module. So it's really cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'll definitely check this out because, to be honest, I've actually been on the Microsoft Learn recently a lot. I'm going through my certification, and obviously AKS is part of the solution architect stuff, and there's a lot of really great content. You can actually just check this out, and there's a whole bunch of useful resources on that. Definitely check that out. YouTube as well, like Skylines Academy. There's so many resources out there, like Skylines. You've got Pluralsight. You've got anything by Tim Warner's really good. I'm not sure if
Tim's a good guy.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's done much on Kubernetes, but there's loads of great stuff out there. Obviously use whatever you go for, but there's lots of stuff on YouTube which is entirely free. Like I pay for my content through. I've got one with work on Pluralsight, and then I pay for Skylines. There's lots and lots of really great stuff out there.
And then if you want to learn anything Kubernetes based or Docker based, then there's a guy called Nigel Poulton who's like a guru when it comes to Kubernetes, and I'm like here and he's like way up there. And he's got some cool books, the Docker book and the Kubernetes book or something like that, Docker Deep Dive. They're available as ebooks or normal books, and he's got some courses on Pluralsight, like you mentioned. But that's how I got started with Kubernetes, is following him, reading his books and watching his courses. And he just makes it so easy to understand. It's really good.
Yeah, there's lots of great stuff because that's it. There is no Kubernetes without Docker. And Nigel, I think Nigel knows the Richmond chat. He's obviously getting that inside scoop. He has to know him, obviously, in the Kubernetes. And there's also a book as well, like you were mentioning, the Kubernetes book and the Docker Deep Dive. You can buy this on leanpub.com. Obviously, I think there's other retailers as well. But you definitely can. You can definitely get this out, and there's lots of really great stuff out there.
No, it's been a fun journey learning AKS. When I first started, I was reading all the hype about it's a developer tool and all that stuff, and then just the more you get used to it and the more you play with it, and with AKS, you only actually pay for the node pools as well, so you can spin up a cluster very cheaply. Pick the smallest VM size you can. You can get the Azure free credits, so you get a 30-day free trial of Azure. I think it's $200 or something like that. Get it, play with it. Use the Azure Learn module, because I think that one's got a sandbox, so you can actually deploy AKS for free. And just get used to it. It's just, once you've done it a few times, it just makes life so much easier. To do it through AKS.
Yeah, no, that's the thing. And also, you can also, if you want to learn more about Kubernetes as well, what you can do is, like you were saying, Richard, like if you come in, so I have done most of this. Let's see, there's, I think there's containers. Oh, let's see, there's definitely one here. Architect. I'm not sure where it is. I'm not sure. But there's definitely there are lots of great stuff out there. But check out Microsoft Learn. You can see here. So say for instance, as you can just see here on this, there's so many. And there we go. That's the workshop's the top item now as well.
Yeah. Introduction to Kubernetes on Azure, a good place to start there.
Yeah, there's lots of stuff. And you can actually use, like, even if you don't have budget or free cloud, you won't be able to use Azure Kubernetes service, but you can use something like Minikube to play about locally, so you can run your Minikube cluster locally on your laptop or your MacBook.
And with Docker for Desktop, you can actually run Kubernetes in that as well now. So that's really cool. It's just like a tick box, and you've got a one node Kubernetes cluster on your workstation as well. So that's cool. There's K3 as well, which is a edge-based Kubernetes system, which was built by Rancher Labs, I think, if I remember right. Or something like that. So that's quite cool. I've not actually played too much with that, but one day I want to get that running on some Raspberry Pis and then have a little Kubernetes cluster on my desk.
Yeah, I've got one of the guys at work. He's got 8 nodes in a Raspberry Pi set up. It's quite impressive. It is quite cool. But yeah, you can use that as well. Rancher's really cool. There's lots of, and that's the thing is there's lots of ways to do this. Like you said, obviously, like Istio as well. There's lots of really great Rancher, OpenShift. There's so many variants of it. So definitely check that out. So, Richard, what I would ask you is, if you were brand new to Kubernetes and you could give any advice to someone who's just starting out, what would that advice be?
Remember spaces in your YAML file, and basically don't be afraid to break things. You know, you're not going to get it right first time. It's going to take a little while because Kubernetes is a massive product. You've got so many extensions for it, so don't be scared. Don't worry about breaking things, especially if it's in Azure, because you can rip it down, spin it back up within less than 10 minutes. You know, just don't be scared. And don't be worried if you're in IT ops. Don't be put off saying it's just a development tool. If you're in development, don't be put off thinking it's not for you. It's only an IT tool because it's for infrastructure. It's for everyone. Everyone should get on board, learn it, and just don't be scared.
Awesome. Yeah, because it's interesting from when you speak to developers, like, yeah, just run this in a container. You know, it just works. And it's like, I'll just send you my container. I'm like, no, it's not quite as straightforward as that. You know, it certainly makes things easier, but it also makes other things way harder as well. Right. Well, we're coming towards the end of today's session, Richard. Is there anything that you'd want to share before we shoot off?
Well, obviously tomorrow, I think it's tomorrow, and the next day we've got Microsoft Ignite happening, which is going to be awesome. So keep an eye out for new announcements about AKS and other little bits and pieces, especially about certification and that. You know, I feel like some good things are going to come out this year, even though we're not there, which is a shame.
Yeah, it is a bit of a, because obviously I saw Gregor talking about how you were supposed to be in New Orleans, and I was actually supposed to be flying out this weekend to the US for a second honeymoon. Obviously,
oh wow,
that got canned. Obviously with all that sort of stuff. But it sounds like obviously, Richard, you're an MVP, so you'll know roughly what's coming out as well over the next couple of days. So you've normally got an inside idea.
Keep your ears to the ground and make sure you watch it. Is all I can say.
Excellent. I'll definitely be there. So honestly, just want to say thank you very much, Richard, for coming along to this week's session. I really enjoyed it, learned a bunch. I hope everyone else did. And all the best, and everyone enjoy Ignite.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Richard.
Thanks.